In 1962, the Jetsons, an American animated sitcom produced by Hanna-Barbera Productions, showcased life through the lens of a humor-ridden family that lives in the year 2062. Orbit City, where they lived, featured tall skyscraper-esque rotundas and a lifestyle of fashion and glam. But one thing that always stood out to me was the flying car. Childhood me would be fascinated by the flying cars, halfway expecting it to happen, maybe in my lifetime. Fast forward to 2022, and instead of innovation and progression being met with open arms, sometimes, like I imagined that cartoon, it seems to be met more divided than ever. And our perception on what our future looks like is maybe a bit more bleak than maybe we'd like to admit. Well, there's only 40 years to go until I can hopefully jump into a green flying orb. I think a more realistic conversation to address is the major milestone of electric vehicles. So before we can run, or in this case fly, let's take a look at electric vehicles, their history, and why sometimes it feels like the feeling of adopting these perceived soulless vehicles into our day-to-day lives and as an enthusiast is more of a guilt trip than a moment of empowerment. I'm Alex, Alex.Martini with 2 underscores on Instagram, and I appreciate any and all support you could give, and if you're interested in snagging a tee, you can do that right over at AlexMartini.net. If not, be sure to subscribe or at least let me know in the comments what you think about this different style video. Trying something new and fresh just because, why not? Differences can be a bit scary, and that's most certainly the case as automotive enthusiasts. People like you and people like me look at car manufacturers like Tesla, Ford, and Audi. But the concept of adopting electric vehicles isn't new to just Tesla and their sometimes comedic marketing. It's been an alternative for over 122 years. In 1900, over 40% of vehicles on the road were electric. In fact, only 22% ran on gas at that time. And while it seemed like a combination of steam-powered, gas-powered, and electric-powered cars were going to carry a pretty even distribution of vehicle sales in the world, the car market itself would take a drastic turn to prioritize one way of producing a vehicle: gasoline and internal combustion. When we look back, we can see the attempts of electric vehicles being the next step of production. It is in almost every book you could read. Thomas Edison and Henry Ford were great friends, and those are 2 of the most prominent names of the 20th century. Those 2 would even share adjacent properties to each other, and often were seen camping and exchanging gifts over a century ago. In 1914, Ford announced in January 11th, 1914, that, quote, "Within a year, I hope, we shall begin the manufacture of an electric automobile. The fact is that Mr. Edison and I have been working for some years on an electric automobile, which would be cheap and practical." But when this was said, Ford established the problem of electric vehicles and probably didn't understand, even in the way he said it, how hard it was going to be to accomplish this. A problem that was unable to be resolved for decades. The weight of batteries in the past and egos of industry giants started the proverbial ball to begin rolling down this hill of what probably is the greatest controversy in automobile production: electric vehicles. What would have been likely the spawn of mass-produced electric vehicles almost 100 years ago ended before production was even a topic. You see, Edison's batteries were demanded to be the use of the Ford electric vehicle that was going to go into production in 1914, something that Edison himself knew wasn't capable. The car instead would be built with heavier lead-acid batteries to achieve the range needed to compete with internal combustion cars. These lead-acid batteries were heavy, fat, and inefficient, where the growing gasoline engine was continuously making steady improvements and consistent progress. Once Ford found out that the electric car project went against his very wishes of using nickel-iron batteries, the project would fall apart. Over $35 million was scrapped in this project, and with the improvement of gasoline vehicles growing in range, ease of use with things like the electric starter, which back then was a huge deal, and oil becoming standard fare, the monster known as Ford prioritized gas vehicle production. And when you look at Ford and you look at that time frame, there was no one even close in terms of competition for production. History has a way of showing us our future, and even though we can give credit to Tesla for pioneering a new generation of electric vehicles into the market, it really can't be helped to question why this adoption has felt so forced. The company most associated with EVs isn't GM and their EV1. After all, it's the eccentric company that was founded in 2003 and spearheaded by Elon Musk in 2004. Since Panasonic and Tesla collaborated with their first generation lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicle production took news space again, with most people criticizing the development because of the poor output from legacy companies like General Motors, Ford, and more. Nobody thought it was going to be any different. The crucial success from Tesla came from Panasonic, Elon's marketing, and the concept of something that was truly new that nobody had ever seen before. Something that didn't seem possible, a new car manufacturer. While we've seen companies like Tesla pave the way for electric vehicle adoption, we're now seeing an onslaught of car manufacturers switching over to it as well. Something that's been claimed in the past. But what feels like a forced change isn't due to the adoption of genuine electric vehicle progression, but the complete dismissal of the audience it leaves behind for those that aren't ready for that adoption. When companies like GM claim it will stop selling gas and diesel vehicles by 2035, something that really isn't that far away, loyal consumers that have supported the brand for what it once stood for are lost. How can someone feel loyal to a brand if what they own is seen, whether intentionally or not, as a burden? That is known as internal combustion engines and how manufacturers are trying to make consumers perceive them as lesser than EVs. The owners of Corvettes, CTSVs, ATSVs, Blackwings, and more haven't been taught or even talked to about what this means for the automotive enthusiast. And since there's very little discussion back and forth, there's little choice. Mercedes made the same claim that in 2025, all new vehicle platforms will be electric vehicle only, and the list goes on and on. In the land of the American dream and freedom, as silly as that can sound sometimes, it often doesn't feel very empowering when you're not given an option on what vehicle you can buy. But Tesla shouldn't be seen in the same light as some of the auto manufacturers listed, because they're not ones forcing you to change. They're forcing who you support to do something better. Tesla might be an electric car, but it never claimed to be anything other than what a consumer needed. It provided what a commuter would need when it was needed. It provided speed and, one might even say, arrogance when an enthusiast needed it. And it's made mistakes, like a brand new company ought to. But the company doesn't disregard its audience like some other auto manufacturers have done so easily with this adoption and change into the electric vehicle market. Tesla prides itself on the ability to modify. It encourages the thought of making vehicles your own, and you see companies like Adro producing carbon fiber components that give its sometimes eggshell appearance some much needed looks improvement. It just looks nicer. But again, it's because that's who Tesla is. Electric vehicles have had no shortage of criticism, disapproval, and judgment for some time. You could trace back to why those feelings may have been justified. I mean, just look at what GM made. But as electric vehicles continue to dominate the talking points of the automotive industry, us as enthusiasts need to understand who in the space is giving us an option and who's trying to force the adoption, because one feels better than another. I have no doubts that this will be an interesting space to grow. And while I'm excited to see what the electrification, that's a long word, of automobiles will do for performance, capabilities, and benefit to our environment, I will watch the manufacturers to understand if they're doing it for true progression, for the true genuine purpose of stepping forward, or because they themselves weren't given a choice. Let me know your thoughts below, and I hope you enjoyed this unique style on the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know what you think. I'm Alex, Alex.Martini with 2 underscores at the end, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye. Hey!